Yeah, Georgia took a beatdown on Saturday in Oxford. Yes, Georgia fans are livid, beside themselves about Mike Bobo, Carson Beck, and the offense. But honestly, who is this Georgia football team? It's about time we talked about it on the Locked On Bulldogs podcast.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. I am Daniel, here talking just like we do every day about the Georgia Bulldogs, your team every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's episode brought to you by the fine folks over at FanDuel, FanDuel.com. Make every moment more. We'll talk about them more in a second. Thanks so much for being here. As always, you guys have been fantastic. You're a fantastic crowd, audience all year, and we really do appreciate you. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. Thanks for being an everydayer. Those of you who are here every day, encourage you, if you're subscribed on the YouTube channel and you normally find us there, go subscribe on the audio podcast side, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you normally listen to us on audio, that's fine. We love that. Just go subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Helps us out, helps other people find the show, which is always a fun time. Georgia, stop me if you've heard this before, just played a monster top 25 matchup. And Georgia this week has another monster top 25 matchup. Last week, Georgia's game had major college football playoff implications. And, oh yeah, this week, Georgia's game has major college football implications. This is just the kind of season that it is. This gauntlet of a schedule, I don't think has ever been seen before in the SEC in college football. Georgia has played more top 25 teams in true road or neutral site environments than they have played home games, period. We're in week 12 of the season, by the way, and Georgia has played more road or neutral site games versus top 25 opponents than they have played home games all year. Thank you, by the way, to the Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce for that scheduling of the Florida game. When are we going to get that back on college campuses? I hate it at this point. Put it in Athens, put it in Gainesville, give us the home games that we deserve. But that is a diatribe and a rant for another time. Let's talk about this Georgia football team because I want to make a couple things clear. Now, Clint and I are going to be back throughout the week. This week, we're going to talk about Tennessee. We're going to talk about the Tennessee matchup. We're going to talk about how we feel about this game. But a lot of Georgia fans are kind of all up in arms about this Georgia team, and everybody's got the people that they love to blame, and the people that they love to blame are all named Mike Bobo. And listen, I've defended Mike Bobo when I thought he deserved defending. This season, I don't think he deserves very much defending. I think it's been pretty bad. I think there's plenty of bad stuff about this Georgia team, but I'll get into that maybe in a little bit. So let me start by saying this, because I do not want to in any way bury the lead this week. Again, we're going to be here all week breaking down this Tennessee game, breaking down with a matchup, all of the things that we like and don't like, blah, blah, blah. Let me get out ahead of it. Tennessee is fraudulent. They're overrated. Georgia's going to beat them on Saturday. Period. End of discussion. Georgia's going to beat Tennessee on Saturday. Take it to the bank. And by the bank, I mean FanDuel Sportsbook. Georgia's going to beat Tennessee on Saturday. So nothing I'm about to say, as much as it may or may not sound like it, is in contradiction to the fact that I believe fundamentally that Georgia is better than and will beat Tennessee on Saturday. Now, that being said, I think Georgia's going to beat Tennessee on Saturday for a couple of reasons. A, because the game is at home, finally, and Tennessee is not ready for this kind of atmosphere. They have played 4 straight home night games. Like, Tennessee has gotten the absolute, clear, easiest path schedule to play well in. And now they're going on the road for a night game in Athens. It's going to be a different environment. And B, because Tennessee's fraudulent. Notice that I did not list as a reason that Georgia is an elite football team. Because this is kind of my point. I think at some point, Georgia fans, as much as we want to dissect and diagnose, and I'm not against that. We should do that. That's fine. It's part of being a fan. It's part of the whole thing. As much as we want to dissect and we want to diagnose why and what's gone wrong and this and that and this person's to blame and this person's to blame and this is to blame and this is the schedule and this is the whatever. I think at some point, regardless of why, we have to accept what? We have to accept the what rather than just fixate on the why. And the what is that at some point you have to let this Georgia football team tell you who they are. And who they have told you that they are over and over again this season is a pretty good football team that is capable of getting hot in moments and also is not good enough to consistently compete with the best of the best in college football on a week in and week out basis. They're not good enough offensively. They're not good enough defensively. They're not good enough at the skill positions. They're not good enough in the trenches. They're not good enough on the coaching staff from a schematic standpoint. They're a good football team who is not elite, who is not capable of week in and week out playing with and beating the best teams in college football. They are capable of getting hot in a moment, causing 4 turnovers against Texas and winning the football game. We know that we beat Texas. I get it. I've heard it before. I get it. I was very excited after that game as well. But when you look at the circumstances in which we beat Texas, the turnovers were able to come. Okay, what happens when you take those turnovers away? I'll tell you what happens. The Ole Miss game happens. I'll tell you what happens. Messing around against Florida happens. I'll tell you what happens. Barely squeaking by Kentucky happens. I'll tell you what happens. Giving up 31 points at home to a Mississippi State team that I was told was turning a corner offensively and was going to be really good the rest of the season. Guess what? Mississippi State still isn't very good offensively. And that Georgia defense at home came out, busted coverages everywhere, and gave up 31 points to them. I'm just saying at some point we have to accept what this team is trying to give us. And what this team is trying to give us is an indication that we're pretty good, but we are not Georgia good. We're not elite good. And that's why I think there are a couple hard realities that we have to look at. I also want to talk about, we'll talk about that when we come back. I also want to talk about something concerning that Kirby Smart said in a press conference. And then in the third segment, we will look ahead to the college football playoff. Is Georgia even going to make it? Where might they be? What teams might be doing what around them to contribute to that? All of that coming up. But first, I want to let you know about these. And these are, in fact, FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook, the opportunity to make every moment more. Look, it's the NFL season right now. It's college football season right now. It's college basketball season right now. It's the NBA season right now. It's the NHL season right now. That's all of them, guys, friends. That's all the sports, like besides Major League Baseball. But the Braves are dead, and so I don't acknowledge that exists. It's all out there for you right now on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to make live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. No multiple windows required. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports book partner of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast and the NFL. Okay. What did I say we were going to talk about in segment 2? Oh, yeah. Some hard truth about who this Georgia team is. At some point, you have to accept this is now what I said in previous years. Georgia's a team that's good and is capable of getting really hot and looking really good in spurts, but not capable of sustained success against the best of the best in college football. Okay. In previous years, that would have been good enough to navigate through a 4-team playoff and win a national championship. Although in previous years, Georgia would already have been eliminated from playoff consideration. And so all of this talk would be completely and totally useless because there would be no way that Georgia would be making it into any sort of 4-team playoff. The problem is that now we have a shot of making it into the playoff. We'll talk about that more in a moment. I actually think Georgia probably is going to make the playoff, especially because I believe, and I told you this already, that I think we're going to beat Tennessee this weekend. And when we beat Tennessee this weekend, I think Georgia's going to have a really good chance to be in the college football playoff at the end of the year. Now, the problem is that while you can get into the playoff being a team like Georgia this year, a 12-team playoff means, and you're not going to get a bye if you're Georgia because you're not even going to make it to the SEC championship game, much less win the SEC championship game. And so that ship has sailed. So it means you're going to have to play 1, 2, 3, 4 games in order to win the national championship. And that is a lot of games to play against really good college football teams in order to navigate all the way to where we want to go. I just don't think that Georgia, as we've seen them this year, and at some point, again, we're in week 12, we have to acknowledge this. This is who Georgia is. I don't think this Georgia team's got what it takes to win the national championship. Now, I know, look, this is a Georgia podcast. You're a Georgia fan. I'm a Georgia fan. Doesn't give me any pleasure to say that. That's not me trying to spout off some sort of a hot take. And sure, I'd love to be wrong. And you in the comments, you can let me know how dumb I am and how silly this is and how blah, 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 whatever. I'm just trying to tell you, based on what I've seen all year, I don't see this team having what it takes to win like 4 really difficult games against really quality opponents. 4 for 4? Like 4-0 in those games? What would you base that on? Georgia's had 4 tough games against quality opponents, and they're 2-2 in those games. Now, one of those teams is Clemson, who's not nearly good enough to be considered a college football playoff team. That's one of the wins. So the 3 college football playoff teams that Georgia has played this year, Georgia is 1-2 against them. Now, I know all those games are on the road. I just don't see Georgia having what it takes to win the national championship this year. And I don't think you can base an argument to the contrary on anything other than speculation that what we've seen now for like all year, like 9 consecutive games, like isn't really who we are. Because who we are is hot and cold, inconsistent, capable of playing really well at times, and not capable of sustained long-term success. Not even dominance, which is what we all want, but even just success against really quality football teams, or even in the case of Kentucky, Mississippi State, very average football teams. Because Kirby can keep saying all he wants about what a road game at Kentucky is like. That is an average to below average football team. Speaking of Kirby Smart, something I saw in the press conference on Monday that gave me a little pause. I think there's a lot of Kirbyese, and Clint mentioned it on Saturday. We're going to be doing extra work. We put extra batteries in the Kirbyese translator. Kirby came out in this press conference and he said, Tennessee's got a really good football team. He's asked about Tennessee's matchup. Okay. Big time team. I'm so impressed with what Josh Heupel's done. It's the same. They're really good. Nico's playing really well. They've got all this talent. They're playing really well defensively. They're doing all these great things. They've got a really talented football team. And then this is where Kirby strays from the usual Kirbyese. He says, and we also have a really good football team. So it's gonna be a really good matchup. We have a good team too, Like we're pretty good at football as well. Okay. It's a small thing, but it starts to feel like Kirby's already in like we're the 5th ranked team in the country and a 4-team playoff, and we're trying to like lobby why it should be us in there instead of Alabama. And, we're getting interviewed and we're talking about all these. It feels like Kirby's lobbying a little bit already. It feels like he's trying to convince someone that this Georgia football team is still good. Is it his own players that he's trying to convince that this Georgia football team is still good? That would be a concern. Is it the College Football Playoff Committee? Because he sees what we're going to talk about in this next segment, that there is by no means a foregone conclusion that Georgia is going to be in this college football playoff. Is that who he's trying to convince? That would be a concern. It sounds like he's trying to talk this team up like he's been trying to do with Carson Beck all year long, where he is very clearly trying to hold the very delicate, very fragile ego of Carson Beck in the palm of his hands all season as he consistently underperforms down in and down out for the University of Georgia. It's concerning because the typical Georgia rhetoric is you respect the heck out of the opponent and you focus on all you need to get better at. And you don't waste any time talking about how good you are, because you don't need to talk about how good you are, because you go out there on the field and you punch people in the mouth for 4 straight quarters. The problem is that you go out there on the field, the Ole Miss offensive line struggles. You get to Jackson Dart a couple times. You hit his arm on a throw. You intercept the ball. You get it inside the 20 to start. You punch it into the end zone, albeit it was a bit of a struggle and took a heroic play from Trevor Etienne to get that ball in the end zone. You punch that ball in the end zone, and then Ole Miss proceeds to blitzkrieg you for 4 straight quarters, and you manage to put up 3 more points in the entire game. That's the Georgia team that we're fielding this year. And so if you're going to if you believe this Georgia team is a really good football team, then you have to try to convince people, because people maybe were watching the game and they said, nah, I don't think that Georgia team is a really good football. They're good, probably. They're going up against a good football team. But how many, let me ask you this, how many really good football teams can there be in college football? Because Georgia's pretty far down that list. That's what I want to talk about in this third segment. Who does Georgia match up against in a potential college football playoff scenario? Who is Georgia competing against in a potential college football playoff scenario, trying to get that last spot? All of that and more right after these. But first, want to talk to you about Gametime. Gametime is the place that Clint and I go when we need last-minute ticket deals. Gametime.co. Listen, we love going to sporting events, whether it is an NBA game, an NFL game, a Georgia game. Maybe you're trying to get down to Athens this weekend to check out that Tennessee game. Maybe you're trying to go to a Falcons game. Wherever it is that you're trying to go, concerts, comedy shows, Gametime is the app for you. Believe me, I have used all of them. Gametime is the only one that I go to now because you get views right from your seats. You get the lowest price guaranteed. You get curated deals to make it easier to find the best prices on the exact seats that you want. And you even get the Gametime super deals. You can use features in the app like customize your spot to give you inspiration of where the best places to sit. Maybe it's a venue you've never been to before. We love this app. Curation makes it easier to save on more sports, more concerts, more comedy, more theater. Gametime has all-in pricing. You toggle that feature on, and it shows you the upfront price with no surprise fees at checkouts, panoramic views from your seat. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime picks. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, college football playoff scenarios. Georgia checks in, at 11 this week in the college bowl, but that doesn't mean anything. So Georgia matches up against Tennessee this weekend. Let's assume that Georgia beats Tennessee. I think, by the way, if Georgia loses to Tennessee, they are definitely out of the college football playoff. I know there are going to be people who are going to argue with that. I know there's a lot of football left to be played, but let me give you some scenarios. I don't think 3-loss Georgia gets in over 1-loss over 1-loss BYU. I don't think 3-loss Georgia gets in, certainly over Notre Dame. I don't think they get in over 1-loss Indiana. I don't think 3-loss Georgia gets in over 2-loss Texas A&M in case Texas A&M beats Texas, which is a very real scenario. I think it would be questionable whether 3-loss Georgia gets in over a 3-loss Texas A&M, even if they lose that game. I'm not sure 3-loss Georgia gets in over 2-loss Clemson. I know Georgia beat Clemson 28-3, but again, 3 losses versus 2 losses. I'd be very close to making it in the college football playoff if they had 3 losses. But I don't think that they would get in. I don't think it's impossible, but I don't think they would get in. But if they beat Tennessee, I think they are almost definitely going to get in to the college football playoff with 2 losses. Here is where things, I think, get problematic. Okay? We know what the format is like. Top 4 teams, top 4 conference champions get their buys. Okay? Boise State or UNLV or Army is going to get the group of 5 spot. They're going to be the 12th seed in the playoff. Okay? Georgia's not going to win a conference championship. Georgia's not going to be the 12th seed, which means there are spots 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Those are the spots that are up for grabs, those 7 spots. We know in the format of the college football playoff that seeds 5, 6, 7, and 8 get to host first-round games. Seeds 9, 10, and 11, and 12, but Georgia's not going to be that. Seeds 9, 10, and 11 have to go on the road to play in those games. Now, a lot of you have been saying, and even were saying to me in the second segment, in the comments probably, well, yeah, Daniel, you're basing the fact that Georgia's not going to win a national championship off the fact that Georgia is 1-2 against college football playoff teams this year. But those games were all on the road. Well, guess what? Georgia's first college football playoff game is almost certainly going to be on the road. Let's talk about these teams. The 5th seed is going to be, in all likelihood, unless Indiana does something crazy this weekend, the 5th seed is going to be a Big Ten team. It's going to be either Ohio State or Oregon, or possibly Indiana if Indiana beats Ohio State this weekend and then were to lose to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game. The 5th seed is going to be a Big Ten team. Okay? So that spot is out. Now Georgia needs to be the 6th, 7th, or 8th team. Okay? Let me name 2 teams that Georgia cannot be ranked ahead of in the college football playoff. Ole Miss and Alabama. Both of those teams will be seated ahead of Georgia in the college football playoff rankings. They played each other, and they lost to those teams. One of them in absolutely embarrassing fashion in the case of Ole Miss. So that means Georgia's only shot at hosting a college football playoff game would be if they are the 8th seed, because you've got, let's call them Ohio State at number 5. You got Ole Miss at number 6. You got Alabama at number 7. It's assuming Ole Miss and Alabama don't lose any more games, but look at their schedules. Neither of those teams are going to lose another game, period. That means if you're Georgia, you would have to be ranked ahead of somebody, like everybody in this group. Penn State, who would only have one loss on the season. Now, I know they lost to the only team that they played, didn't make the Big Ten championship game, blah, blah, blah. But only one loss in the season. You'd have to be ranked ahead of one loss Notre Dame, who I know lost to Northern Illinois and ain't beaten nobody, except they did beat Texas A&M early in the year, and they only have one loss. You'd have to be ranked ahead of, at that point, one loss Indiana, whose only loss of the season would have come to the Ohio State Buckeyes, and they would have beaten every other team on their schedule. I know. They haven't played anybody, Daniel. They don't deserve to be ranked ahead of Georgia. Daniel, let me ask you this. Did Florida State deserve to be ranked ahead of Georgia last year? Did Alabama deserve to be ranked ahead of Georgia last year? No, they did not. Why were they ranked ahead of Georgia last year, Daniel? Because a college football playoff committee decided that they should be. You tell me, do you think Georgia is going to get the benefit of the doubt against all 3 of those teams? I do not. That means Georgia's first game in the college football playoff is going to be a road game. Now, if you're Georgia, you're like, oh, well, that's okay because we could beat any of those teams on the road that you just mentioned. We could beat Penn State on the road. We could beat Indiana on the road. We could beat Notre Dame on the road. I think we could beat any of those teams on the road. You're right. But what if it's not one of those teams? What if it's Alabama on the road? Do you really want to go to Tuscaloosa again and play that game again? Because I think coming out of that game, we thought, well, Georgia's probably the better team. Now, do you think Georgia's the better team? Do you really want to go back to Oxford and play that game again? There's just, when Georgia beats Tennessee this weekend, I think we'll be in the college football playoff. And all you can ask for is a shot. I ask you, and let me know in the comments. Do you seriously think that this Georgia team has what it takes to win 4 in a row, to win a road game in the first round, and then go toe-to-toe with, one of the top 4 seeds? And depending on your seeding, you could get an easy draw, and you could get like BYU or Colorado in that game, which would be unbelievable, but you probably won't because that would be Ohio State, the 5 seed. And so you're going to have to go up against somebody, maybe Texas again, maybe Oregon. And then you got to play 2 more of those games after that. 4 in a row? It's a lot to ask if you're a Georgia fan. It's going to be interesting. Clint and I, again, will be talking about this Tennessee game all week, beginning tomorrow here on the show. Join us for that. Make sure you're subscribed to the pod, and we will see you guys then.